Please give rise to bodhicitta, the thought I will establish all mother sentient beings at the level of perfect enlightenment. To that end, I will listen to this profound Dharma and put it into practice. The teaching that we're looking at is the complete instructions on the preliminary practices of the secret and profound heart essence of the Dakinis, a torch lighting the way to freedom, comprised of the virtuous beginning, middle, and end. Having covered the virtuous beginning, we're looking at the virtuous middle, which is comprised of two main parts: how to follow a spiritual friend, the route of the path, and the main explanation of the stages for setting out on the path. We have covered the first, we're now looking at the second, the main explanation of the stages for setting out on the path. This is comprised of two further subsections: the general preliminary practice and the uncommon special preliminaries. The general preliminary practice contains an explanation of the general preliminaries for each session. Which we've covered, and then now we're looking at the specific section 2, the specific preliminary practices for the yogas of the two phases, which is comprised of an explanation of the common preliminaries, the four mind changings, and the uncommon special preliminaries. So from among the four, we're currently looking at the common preliminaries, the four mind changings. We've covered the reflection on the difficulty of finding the freedoms and advantages. We're now looking at the reflection on death and impermanence, which is comprised of three main reflections, and we're currently looking at the third. We've covered the first two, and we're looking at the third, reflecting on the fact that when one dies, nothing can help one. So this reflection comprises reflecting on the fact that one's body cannot help one, that one's possessions cannot help one, that one's relatives and friends cannot help one. So we are currently looking at the third, reflecting that one's relatives and friends cannot help one. We've covered some of these points, and we'll continue where we left off. Friends and relatives refers to one's circle, one's friends, one's loved ones, one's family. When you die, they cannot help you, right? They cannot save you, even if they surround you on your deathbed. They cannot save you from the suffering of death. The suffering of death you have to endure alone. There's no way around it. Likewise, when you then leave this life and enter the bardo, the intermediate state, you have to go alone. Even a king cannot take a single one of his thousands of servants. Even if a lama has thousands of disciples and monks, they cannot take a single one with them. So this is to say that when it comes to the time of death, none of your friends and relatives can help you. You have to leave them all behind and go on alone. So now we come to the discussion of the fault in not meditating on impermanence. So on page 91, So that reflection on page 91, having concluded that, we come to the advantages of meditating on impermanence on page 92. So some Christians say, you Buddhists are always meditating on suffering, on misery, the misery of death and so on. We as Christians are a joyful tradition. We're always meditating on God, on making offerings up to Almighty God and so on. But this is not really how it is. The point of reflecting on impermanence and death is not to make us miserable, it's not to make us suffer more. There are reasons why we choose to reflect on impermanence and death. To acknowledge the fact, the reality that myself, together with all phenomena, all conditioned things, are impermanent. This is one of the first things Buddha taught, right? And to acknowledge that this is a suffering, a situation not shared, not unique to oneself, but actually shared by everyone and everything. We are all impermanent. So when one falls sick, one advantages of this reflection is to acknowledge that one's suffering, like sickness and so on, are not private sufferings. They're sufferings that afflict all other sentient beings as well. So actually, this reflecting on impermanence and death in this way does not increase one's suffering. It's not intended to make one miserable, and it does not make one miserable. So there's a story about one of Yuko Jajal's students, an exceptional student who was a great perfection disciple, Domten Purba, I think his name is. And I'll tell the story just in short. Many of you will have heard it already. His entire family, 15 or more people, were murdered over the course of a single day. Anyone else would go crazy at such sudden and severe loss, right? And it wasn't like they died in a natural disaster. They were murdered, stabbed and burnt alive by a warring party. They were a really horrific occurrence. And then someone went to see Domten Purba and informed him what had happened to his family. How, this warring party came and attacked the family, murdered them. Those who tried to escape were locked into the house, which was then set afire and they were burnt alive. He was told this. And how did he react? He said, he paused and reflected for a moment, and then he said, "Oh, I see. The nest of ants has been destroyed. The nest of ants has been destroyed." And then he said, "Can you tell me that again?" And he was told the situation in news again, and then he said the same thing. And that was it, end of story. So that shows that he had taken impermanence to heart, right? Understood that appearances are impermanent and illusory, right? So he was able to take it. Anyone else would be completely overwhelmed by such a tragedy, such an occurrence. They might lose their mind with grief, or they would be filled with such anger and resentment. They would want to take their revenge on the warring party. And this is how realized practitioners are, how realized yogins are. And as practitioners and scholars, this is the level we need to reach, right? So where do our issues come from? Our problems come from our grasping itself, our grasping at permanence. Our grasping at permanence, our presumption that things are permanent, that we are permanent, that our friends are permanent, that lifespan is permanent. This is a complete mistake. But this mistaken grasping or presumption that things are impermanent, this causes us enormous suffering. And it's in discord with reality. When we fail to understand the way things really are, when we are ignorant of reality, the state of reality, then that is what causes us suffering, right? That is what causes us suffering and anguish, and even to the extent of sending us crazy. So the advantages of meditating on impermanence, the benefits of meditating day and night just on death and impermanence are said to be boundless. One sees that everything that appears is perishable and thereby gains a deep sense of non-attachment to outer objects, so one's friends, one's relatives, one's home, homeland, and so on. Understanding that these are impermanent, they are transient and fleeting. So when you take impermanence to heart, your attachment reduces. You give rise to non-attachment. The fire of diligence in the performance of positive actions is set ablaze. One begins to feel an uncommon and heartfelt fear of the sufferings of cyclic existence. From recognizing that at the time of death nothing can help one gives up the activities of this life. Nothing, whether it be material wealth, status, reputation, none of it can help at the time of death. None of these mundane activities aimed at solely at this life, none of these can help. One uses one's body, speech and mind to practice the Dharma without taking even a moment of ordinary leisure. Without taking even a moment of leisure, because one sees that there really is nothing more important than the Dharma. So one applies oneself night and day through the 3 periods of day, the 3 periods of night, constantly in the Dharma. So without any break, not thinking that, oh, now it's time to eat, now it's time to sleep, so therefore this is not a time to practice the Dharma, it's a time to do something else, not making these kinds of divisions in one's time, in one's daily life. One sees how actions mature as results, and this gives rise to determination to be free and disenchantment. One becomes vividly aware of the karmic consequences of actions, and so automatically avoids negative actions, because one knows that, oh, this is going to result in suffering, this is going to obscure me, this is going to torment me in the future. As one knows that the time of death is unpredictable, one does not count on anything. Everyone has to die. Even Buddha Shakyamuni, the source of the Buddha Dharma in our world, passed away in Kushinagar. His followers, the great masters who further explained his teachings, like Nagarjuna, Charnakirti, and so on, they also passed away. Even our precious root gurus like Kyabje Dushan Rinpoche, he also passed away. Many of us, like myself, had the great fortune of meeting him when he was alive, but now he too has passed away. Kyabje Dushan Rinpoche's Parinirvana anniversary is the 18th day of this lunar month, so just in a day or two. So this is a really wonderful, auspicious coincidence that Kyabje Dushan Rinpoche's Parinirvana falls in these weeks of teachings where we are teaching his precious text. And Rinpoche was saying that Rinpoche said that Kyabje Dushan Rinpoche passed away on Longchenpa's Parinirvana anniversary, which is the 18th day of the 12th lunar month. And Rinpoche was explaining, I'm afraid I didn't quite catch it, but how depending on how you calculate the day in the astrological calendar in which Kyabje Rinpoche passed away, you could say it is the case that he passed away on Longchenpa's anniversary. So as you know, we originally planned to hold this program in March, but then there were many requests to move the program earlier and a lot of discussion about sort of what specific dates. And eventually I handed over the final decision to the organizers and agreed with their suggestion to set it for these dates. And it was a complete coincidence that not only Kyabje Dushan Rinpoche's Parinirvana, but also Kyabje Chartung Dushan Rinpoche's both fall within these few weeks of this program. So this is a really auspicious coincidence. So in the past, my father, Siddha Rinpoche, he travelled from Golok through Tibet to the Himalayan border regions, to places including Dorgo, where he gave empowerments and transmissions and had many students, taught there quite extensively. And as a result, the teachings are still flourishing in Dorgo, Siddha Rinpoche's students and their students. And likewise, Degye Rinpoche, the first Degye Rinpoche, travelled to Ngari in Tibet, and then down from Ngari to over the border to Humla, and Rinpoche mentioned other places like Spiti and surrounding areas, and gather many disciples. And in this way, in short, in this way, from generations back, our lineage gurus, Siddha Rinpoche, the first Degye Rinpoche, and so on, spread the teachings in these areas, and many of the disciples, many students from these areas, who are disciples of these previous masters, or disciples of their disciples, are here. in short, this incredibly auspicious coincidence of Tratum Dujul Lingpa and Kyabje Dujul Rinpoche's Parinirvana anniversaries falling within these few weeks. In short, this just shows the strong and positive karmic connections that us Himalayan people and those of you here that we have with these teachings, with the teachings of this lineage. So we talk in the Tibetan word as Tenjo, so which literally means dependent arising, but also has this sense of auspicious connections, auspicious coincidences. So the best kind of Tenjo, auspicious coincidence, are those that are really coincidences, unplanned, things that just naturally, auspicious things that naturally come together, like we see here with this program. So in the past I had this story from Khemo Dazo Rinpoche, how at some point in the past the Derge printing house, which is one of the main printing houses in the whole of Tibet, they invited a great Lama, because of his great learning and expertise, they invited him from afar to proofread the Kongyur, the collected words of the Buddha. And the local scholars in Derge were very offended. They thought, we've been shown up by this other scholar. Instead of giving us the work, they're inviting someone else. And they were very offended and affronted. They thought, we need to send this, we can't let this teacher back, this scholar from, another area come. We've got to do something to send him away, what to do. And then they thought, well, auspicious coincidences of Tenjo is very important, so let's contrive some inauspicious coincidences on his journey, and that will really put him off. That'll put the scholar himself off, and he himself will choose to leave. So they arranged one thing, they contrived one auspicious coincidence on his journey. A young girl wearing black, I didn't quite catch the details, but wearing black clothes and carrying something inauspicious. something that was regarded as very inauspicious. They contrived that, and so the Lama saw that and thought, when he was on his way to the Dergi printing house, he saw that and he thought, that's very inauspicious, that's not a good sign. I wonder what that means. But then he turned around, being a Lama himself, being a great Lama himself, he turned around, looked in the other direction and saw something else. I counted how many women were actually there. There were 18, and he said, well, that's actually how auspicious is that? It's a sign of the 18 profound emptinesses. And so on. So the story goes. This just illustrates what we call spontaneous auspicious coincidences, which is what we have here, with the Parinirvana anniversaries of Drusha Ningpa and Kyabje Drusha Rinpoche both falling within these few weeks. And for followers of the Drusha Rinpoche, Kyabje Drusha Rinpoche's Parinirvana is celebrated very extensively. All of the Drusha Rinpoche monasteries here and in the US and so on will celebrate this in the coming days. At our monastery up in Humla, this is one of the 4 main anniversaries we celebrate each year. With a long puja, we practice the extensive Trema liturgies, which we begin at around 6 a.m. And it takes all day up until 6 or 7 or later at night. That's right. This anniversary is tomorrow, actually. Kyabje Drusha Rinpoche's Parinirvana is tomorrow. And actually up at the monastery, we're always short on time because we have a monastic university, the Shedra, which, if that weren't the case, there were many other Parinirvana anniversaries of great masters that we would celebrate, but because we have to cover the monastic university curriculum every year, we don't have time to do that up at our monastery in Humla. So tomorrow we will celebrate Kyabje Rinpoche's Parinirvana, we will commemorate it. So tomorrow, because it's Kyabje Rinpoche's Parinirvana, I will teach until 10 a.m. and then we'll have a short break, 10 or 15 minute break, and then from 10:15 we will begin puja. We will begin the puja, and we will continue the puja all day until she said 4 or 5. So the time in terms of our starting and finishing times tomorrow, they're the same, but we will start puja, we will conclude the teachings earlier at 10 and start puja earlier at 10:15, and then we will conclude shortly after 4, so the usual time. And this is an opportunity for us to accumulate an enormous amount of merit by commemorating Kyabje Drusha Rinpoche's Parinirvana with puja, by making Dana Chakra offering and so on. And those of you who are not following the text, then will participate in the practice by chanting the Vajraguru mantra. So we'll all practice together in this way. So this all stemmed, all of this discussion stemmed from the text, page 92, the discussion of the advantages of meditating on impermanence. One sees how actions mature as results, and this gives rise to determination to be free and to disenchantment. It frees one from the snares of hope and fear. Numerous virtues that one did not have before are born in one's mind stream. One stops believing things are internal and so on. One does not have attachment to friends and relations or hatred for enemies. One is constantly diligent in performing positive actions, in applying oneself to the Dharma. So, all of you are listening really well, but one thing is, while you're listening to teachings, do not keep chanting mantras, do not keep spinning your mani wheels. You should put all activities aside when listening to teachings. Put your mala down, stop chanting mantras, stop spinning your mani wheel. To actually recite mantras and spin your mani wheel while listening to teachings is actually just a sign that you don't know how to listen to the Dharma. There is nothing more precious than the Dharma, nothing more precious than listening to the Dharma. So when you have the opportunity to do that, you put everything else aside. Put your mala down, put your mani wheel down, and just listen. Moreover, things like arriving late or getting up in the middle of the teaching and walking out of the assembly and so on, these are also very this is careless and disrespectful and shows that you don't know how to listen to the teachings. So I've mentioned these points before, including 2 years back when teaching the words of my perfect teacher. These are all important aspects of listening, how to listen to the teachings. So when listening to the teachings, you put your mala down, your mani wheel down, you sit still, you don't arrive late, you don't get up in the teaching, you don't cover your head and so on, unless of course, as we said before, unless you are sick, then there's an exception. One understands that life is a delusion, that this life is just a delusion, it's just a deluded experience. One completes the 2 accumulations of merit and wisdom, and so on. And in this way, there are countless benefits to meditating on impermanence. In the words of my perfect teacher, we have the story of Karak Gomchung. The words of my perfect teacher, which I've taught myself and which so many other teachers are teaching. You can listen to these teachings on YouTube and so on. There's so many chances to listen to explanations of the words of my perfect teacher. Some students listen, really pay great attention and keep the teachings in mind. Some students once came to me and said, well, in the past, last year when you told this story, you told it like this, and then the other day you told it slightly differently, so aren't these in contradiction? It's true, often I tell the same stories, but sometimes in more detail, sometimes in less detail. But paying attention like that, keeping the points in mind, is a sign that you're really paying attention to the teachings. But anyway, the point of these teachings, I might tell them, the point of these stories, I might tell them in slightly different ways, in different contexts, but the point of the story is always the same, right? So with Kara, with his practitioner, Kara Gomchung, he was a practitioner practicing in a cave, and outside his cave was a thorny bush. And every time he had to leave his cave to go to the toilet or what have you, his clothes would catch on the thorny bush and his skin would get scratched, and then he'd think, oh, I should probably cut this bush back, it's quite inconvenient. But then his second thought would be, well, who knows if I'll actually be alive by the end of my next session, whether I'll actually be leaving this cave again. So better that I spend my time, better that I just sit down and spend my time practicing Dharma than wasting my time cutting this bush. And so day after day, session after session, the same thing would happen. The days went past. And through his diligent practice, he eventually attained accomplishment, but he had still not cut that thorny bush. The thorny bush had grown so big it was almost completely covering the door of the cave. So this shows, this is an example of someone who has really taken impermanence to heart, really meditating on the reality of impermanence and death. There's so many other stories we could tell to this end, like of omniscient Jigme Lingpa, and he was staying at Sachu, a place in Sachu. There's another story about reflecting on impermanence in relation to that, and so many other stories. Stories without end. The Nirvana Sutra says, of all the various kinds of cultivation, reaping the autumn crop is the best. So unless it's the reaping the autumn crop that is the most fruitful part of cultivation of farming, right? Not sowing seeds in the spring and so on. So there's a practitioner called Lama Choku, who's a disciple of my father Jigye Rinpoche and uncle Agutsewa Rinpoche. Probably many of you are from his same homeland. He did a 1-3 retreat and now is again on his second 3-year retreat. And he's also a practitioner who's really taken impermanence and death to heart, to the point that it brings him to tears. So I saw him being sort of brought to tears at the thought of impermanence and death, and I thought, he's, I think, really become a good practitioner and taken these points to heart. So this Lam has already passed away, but when it came time for him to die, he knew with his prescience that he was going to die. He went down, met his family and friends and so on, and then went off back to his practice place, and without even being sick with the cold, he died. He died really perfectly. So he told his family and friends, or some Dharma friends, oh, this and that's going to happen, and then I will die, so then do this for me. He had perfect prescience about it. So this is the kind of science that genuine practitioners, a science of genuine practice and practitioner. And a lot of people here are nodding their heads. A lot of you are from the same homeland and knew this Lama and know that this how this happened. But such genuine practice and practitioners come from taking the fact of impermanence and death to heart, right? And then one can become a really pure practitioner and progress like Lama Chugu and others. Otherwise, if you don't take impermanence to heart, then you might just busy yourself with lots of Dharma rituals. It'd be very superficial. Busy yourself with doing rituals for others, gathering offerings, and so on and so forth. So these cells up in Humla and Muam Kamarong and surrounding areas. These days, things are pretty good. All the lamas and appas and so on, when they do pujas, they do it very well and nicely without drinking. In the past, there was lamas had the habit of drinking. They would drink liquor during practice and they often end up drunk, and the puja would just kind of descend into chaos. So anyway, now we on previous Lama and then backed up by me in recent years, kind of encouraged or commanded all the Lamas to not drink during pujas, and now everyone has stopped drinking during pujas and things are much better. So anyway, the point is, if you, an example of a genuine practitioner, pure practitioner, is someone like Lama Chugu, and on the other end of the spectrum you have people who drink and get drunk during puja, end up with their pechas scattered everywhere and so on. Up in the mountains, there's this often people have the habit of drinking liquor, lamas included. But there are some accomplished lamas, if they're realized accomplished lamas, who can drink and not be affected by the alcohol, not be affected and never get drunk. But to drink and get drunk, there's nothing useful about that, in short. She was talking about some various words in Tibetan, including the word for alcohol, for monk, and so on. Different ways they can be explained, and kind of some funny anecdotes in connection with that. So the quotation from the Nirvana Sutra says, this is the Buddha's own words, of all the various kinds of cultivation, reaping the autumn crop is the best. Of all footprints, that of the elephant is the biggest. Of all thoughts, that of impermanence and death is the greatest. It stops all thoughts involved with the three worlds or realms of desire, form and formlessness that comprise the whole of samsara. It's like the parting from the four attachments by the great Sakya Master, which Pater Rinpoche quotes in his words of my perfect teacher. If you're attached to samsara, you lack renunciation. If you're attached to samsara, you lack renunciation and forget about being a practitioner of the Mahayana and so on. You cannot even genuinely practice the Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha teachings. So if you're attached to your land, your property, and invested in lots of plans for the future and so on, then this shows you lack renunciation. So, sometimes people where we live get so attached to their land and their property and so on, and end up in conflicts about this, and then suing each other over property rights and that kind of thing. And then I think it was Rinpoche's uncle, Agotseon Rinpoche said to them, "What do you think you're doing? What are you planning on? You're planning on taking rebirth as like cows or something who are going to eat the grass in these fields?" It's a very sharp, good scolding, right? So your attachment, if you're attached to samsara, that means attached to things in samsara, your land, your fields, your property, or what have you. If you have such attachment, you do not have renunciation. The great Master Guru Rinpoche says, to obtain the freedoms and advantages is scarcely possible, but even if you do, there's no knowing when you'll die, for death, like lightning's play, is unpredictable. With each day, each hour, life is running out, so don't defer the practice, child of my speech. You never know when you're going to die. Death will strike just like lightning, suddenly and without any warning. So 60 seconds make up a minute, 60 minutes make up an hour, 24 hours make up one day. In this way, with each day, each hour, life is running out. So do not defer, do not delay your practice. That is not sensible, that is not okay. Don't procrastinate. Don't think I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it the next day. Yeah, I'm going to do a 3 retreat, but I'll do it in the future. If you have the intention to stay on retreat, then start straight away. If you have the intention to do Ngondro, then start your Ngondro straight away. Don't procrastinate, because you don't know when death will strike. If you procrastinate, it might be that death arrives before you end up starting your practice. Nagarjuna writes, as if your hair or clothes had just caught fire, abandon all to put a stop to this, and do your best to not be born again. No greater goal or need is there than that. This verse is from Nagarjuna's letter to a friend. Imagine that a young woman is preparing to go out to a party, and she's got dressed, she's done her hair, her makeup and everything, and she's ready to step out the door, and then a spark of fire hits her hair and her hair caught on fire. How would she react? Immediately she'd pat her hair, putting out the fire, right? She wouldn't delay for a single second. So in the same way, abandon all to put a stop to this. And do your best not to be born again. So actually, what's being taught here is that we should practice with such urgency that even if our hair were to catch on fire, even if our clothes were to catch on fire, really, it would be very important then to put out the fire, right, with our hands or with water or what have you. But he's saying you should practice with such urgency that you should forsake even such actions. The point is, we need to practice with urgency. Practice with urgency so that we do our best to not be born again in samsara. So, the Tibetan word here is yangsi, which literally means to again be reborn in cyclic existence. But this term has two meanings, two connotations. One is to take rebirth intentionally out of compassion, and one is to be reborn under the control of one's karma. You can also make a threefold division. Those who take rebirth out of wisdom, the Dharmakayas, who manifest emanation bodies in samsara, and then those who take rebirth out of under the sway of their karma and afflictions. This is the ordinary beings, right, who take rebirth in samsara. Anyway, the point is that in Tibetan as well, that yangsi literally means to take rebirth in samsara, but it's also used to describe tulkus, those who intentionally take rebirth out of compassion. So. So we should practice with urgency and do our best not to be born again. Not to be born again under the control of karma and afflictions. Right. As opposed to intentionally taking rebirth out of compassion, which is what the enlightened ones do. There is no greater goal or need. No greater goal or need is there than that. These are the words of the noble master Nagarjuna. There is no greater goal or need than this, than to applying ourselves to the Dhamma so that we can free ourselves from the wheel of samsara. Attaining some title of lopan or what have you, or building something or this and that project. Those are not important. The most important thing, the greatest goal, is to apply ourselves to practice so that we free ourselves from the wheel of samsara. So these are the words of Nagarjuna himself. There's no greater authority than that. And the Padamba Sangha says, first you finish what you have to do, you'll never get to Dharma. People of Dingri, while you're thinking of it, practice straight away. So Padamba Sangha had so much affection for the people of Dingri. I gave them such excellent loving advice, so many teachings. If you first finish what you have to do, you'll never get to the Dharma. If you think, oh, I'll just finish what I'm doing, I'll just finish this piece of work, this project, and then I will start my practice, you will never get around to it, because there's always something to do, there's always something to occupy your attention. Like if you're a farmer, well, in spring, there's certain farming work you have to do. Then in the summer, there's other stuff you have to do, weeding and so on. And then in autumn, well, you then have to harvest your crop, right? In winter, you need to plow your fields. There's always something to occupy you. Likewise with politics, likewise with business, there's never a quiet season, so to speak. There's always something happening, something to occupy your attention. So this is how it is over here in the Himalayas and so on. Season after season, there's always something for people to do, even if they plan otherwise. And in places like America and Canada and what have you, then it's even more the case, right? People never have any leisure. Morning to night they're working. It's like a rail station at Calcutta. One train is coming in, another one's going out. if you look at a family, parents, like the mother might leave house for work before the father and children are up. When the mother comes home, the father's out working. The children hardly see their parents because their parents are always working. They just take some food from the fridge to eat. They're all constantly busy going in and out. So there's no free time. This is why as soon as you have the intention to practice the Dharma, you need to act on it. You need to just sit down and you just need to get on with your Dharma practice. Don't think, oh, well, just first of all, I'll finish this or that piece of work and then I'll do it. Because you'll never get to the Dharma. People of dignity, so while you're thinking of it, while you're thinking of practicing the Dharma, then practice straight away. So reject all the superficial things of this world as though it's so much spit in the dust and practice the perfectly pure sacred Buddha Dhamma according to the instructions of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So a story here from my uncle Aguru Rinpoche's life. So Aguru Rinpoche, my father Aguru Rinpoche, just like my grandfather said to Rinpoche, when he got the idea to leave and go somewhere, he would just like get up and go straight away, it seemed. So one day, it seems maybe he had a disagreement with someone or something, but he, without telling anyone or any advance warning, he left where he was and seemed to just disappear. So, in short, Aguru Rinpoche just seemed to disappear, and then a week or so later, I found out that he was in a cave, practicing in a cave somewhere in Drogpo. And I think the point of the story is that then some maybe disciples caught up with him, and anyway, Aguru Rinpoche's advice, what he said to them was basically exactly this instruction. When you think of something, when you think to do practice, you should just go and do it. Because work never comes to an end. Work and projects never come to an end. They only come to an end when you put them aside. It's only when you drop your work that your work finishes. So this anecdote about my uncle Aguru Rinpoche I heard from someone I met in Dolpo the other day at the Sheri festival. And what Agro Rinpoche said at that point, that work only comes to an end when you drop the work. That is absolutely true. That's how it is. That's also completely in line with Patrul Rinpoche's teachings in the words of my perfect teacher. So, therefore, thinking that I might be able to do so, precious teacher, in you I put my trust, and as you recite the following prayer. So there's at some point, anyway, in the past there was someone who was kind of teasing or a bit criticizing, but in like kind of teasing the Namkha Kyungsong masters like Seto Rinpoche, Dekyo Rinpoche, and Abot Sengol Rinpoche is maybe kind of pointing at the fact that they were building monasteries and establishing monastic communities and so on. And they said, this person said, Seto Rinpoche, when things are going well, then he settles down. When things are good, he settles down and establishes his kingdom, and when things don't go well, he packs up his bag and walks off. And that really was the case. We should give a few examples of specific examples of Seto Rinpoche's life. So, from one perspective, this might seem like a bad way to go about one's work, when problems arise, just to drop your work and pack up your bags and leave. But from another perspective, a Dharma practitioner perspective, maybe this is a really good thing, actually, a quality of a great Lama. Anyway. So now we come to the next reflection, reflecting on the defects of cyclic existence. This chapter has 3 sections, reflecting generally on the sufferings of cyclic existence, reflecting specifically on the sufferings of the 6 classes of beings, and reflecting particularly on the nature of the 3 kinds of suffering. First of all, reflecting generally on the suffering of cyclic existence. As we have seen, we are sure to die and we are powerless to continue living. But things do not stop with death. We have to take birth again. If death was the end of the story, then that would be quite nice. Nothing to worry about. But that's not the case. Things don't stop with death. We have to take birth again. And as long as we're reborn, we will continue to suffer according to the birth that we take, the suffering of animals or hell beings or humans or what have you, depending in what realm we are reborn. There's a story about past and future lives. No need to really tell this story to bring the point home to all the practitioners here, to those the practitioners of Mani Mantra and Rajaguru Mantra and so on, they have a lot of faith and trust in past and future lives, but there might be some young people here and also foreigners who maybe doubt the truth of past and future lives. So in the Abhidhamma, treasury of Abhidhamma, it says that all phenomena can be condensed into consciousness, material matter, and unconditioned things. So, consciousness Consciousness is not matter, it's not something that can be measured. It doesn't have form or shape, it doesn't have size and so on. And because it's not perceptible and measurable in that way, then modern scientists and a lot of younger people these days, younger generation, come to the mistaken conclusion that because mind cannot be seen, that therefore it ceases to exist at the point of death. So to counteract this idea, mistaken idea, as a story or anecdote. So modern scientists talk about, or neuroscientists study the brain, right? Which they say is rooted in the brain. They say there is no mind, no consciousness separate from the brain. And this is not in line with Buddha's teachings, with Buddhist understanding. Buddhists understand that Buddha taught that consciousness is not material. Consciousness is not matter. So if you say, okay, well, if consciousness is not in the brain, if it's not the matter of the brain, then where is it? What is it?
Consciousness, unconsciousness and so
So these modern scientists and neuroscientists say that all of our sensations, perceptions, consciousness basically is the result of the movement of energy or what have you through the brain neurochannels and stuff. But in answer to people who have such an understanding, we could explain that mind consciousness actually is not rooted in the material, it is not matter. And when we talk about mind or consciousness, we can identify different types of consciousness. We can talk about main mind, subsidiary mind. We can talk about the 5 sense consciousnesses, mental consciousnesses, and also the all-ground consciousness, which is the root and source of all. And because the modern scientists are not aware of the all-ground consciousness, they don't have this understanding, then they think consciousness is just limited to the sense consciousness as a mental consciousness, and so that when the brain, where you can see these sense perceptions occur, when the brain dies, so that therefore consciousness itself dies. So the sense consciousnesses are rooted in matter, rooted in the brain, but the all-ground consciousness, which is the source of all, is not rooted in matter at all. And this is clarified in Longso Mahabandita's Entering the Way of the Greater Vehicle.
春浪电视没吧，春浪电视接吧是书香的，特别多。但定俺老是别着我嘛，我几天把过去，我听着说，但定是Ngondro到些了。当然，这个的感觉好的是呢，但这个来不的呢，当时是站里面不睡，他车里不站里面不睡。咱们和老人呢，你没有睡呢，其实我的directing，然后所以那点他。
So it seems that some scientists did an experiment with rats, making rats consciousness and somehow wiping their memory. They did something to wipe their memory and make them completely unconscious. So they completely drugged these rats in this way. And then they arranged like a small wooden box with a hole, something that resembled a rat's nest. And when they woke the rats up, the rats, in spite of being drugged so heavily and had their channels or what have you kind of wiped clean, still they displayed the habits of rats, searching for a nest, relating to this box as a nest. So this shows that the habitual tendencies that rest in the all-ground are not rooted in physical matter, basically. So this is So this actually demonstrates a lot. These scientists had wiped clean these rats' brains, so to speak. But nevertheless, when the rats woke up, they were still displaying kind of rat-like behavior. That behavior, it's not possible that it was rooted in the brain, because their brains had been completely washed clean. So that is a function of the habitual tendencies, which come from the all-ground consciousness. So in this way I wasn't able to translate it all the details there. But by looking at such occurrences and thinking in this way, one can come to understand how there is consciousness separate from the brain, separate from matter, consciousness that endures, separate from the body. And this can help us understand how there are future lives, how consciousness does continue after the death of this physical body. For instance, when, say, a calf is born, the moment it pops out of its mother's womb, it immediately looks for milk, right? It stands up and searches for its mother's udders and starts drinking. No one taught it that, no one needs to teach it that. So where does that behavior come from? It comes from its habitual tendencies from past lives, right? So in the behavior of calves and other animals, you can see a lot of proof for habitual tendencies from past lives, right, in the behavior that they display. That said, we could give these very things as proof, and modern scientists could explain them away in other ways. So that's their perspective. Yeah, they have their own way of explaining things, but from our perspective, these are clear signs of habitual tendencies from past lives, right? and those tendencies being awakened. We have to take birth again, and as long as we are reborn, it cannot be anywhere other than in cyclic existence. So as Nagarjuna says in his Ratnavali, for as long as there is conception of the aggregates, for that long there will be conception to the self. We could say as long as there's grasping to the aggregates, our personal aggregates of body and so on, for that long there will be grasping to the self. For instance, we think, oh, this is my body, this is me, so therefore I exist. As long as there's conception of the aggregates, for that long there is conception of the self. And for that long there will be a rebirth in samsara. So now once past self-clinging acts as a cause for future self-clinging in this chain of cause and effect. So we can see the function of habitual tendencies from past lives that are stored in the all-ground consciousness, in the behavior of animals, as I just explained. And we can also see it in the activities of the great Teretans, the treasure revealers. Of course, scientists and so on would not accept this, but look at the life of Khyalche Dushun Rinpoche, Dushun Lingpa, Khyentse Wangpo, and so on. They can see landscapes far and wide, just like looking in a mirror, seeing where the treasures they're destined to reveal lie under the ground or where have you. They can remember perfectly things that happened centuries ago when they were when they'd taken rebirth as other people, as for instance Jamni Khyentse Wangpo, as Khyentse Sodetsen and so on. They can recollect and see all of these things just like looking in a mirror. So we think of this experiment scientists did with rats, flushing out the rats' brains and then waking them up. Still the rats were behaving like rats, right? So where's that behavior come from? If there's nothing in their brains, the physical matter of their brains, to dictate their behavior, where could their behavior come from? The only answer is the habitual tendencies from stored in the all-ground consciousness. So beings never have the intelligence to escape from cyclic existence. Round and round they go, like bees caught in a jar. For as long as we have the conception of a self, as long as we have self-clinging, we'll continue to take rebirth, we'll continue to sulk around and round in samsara, just like bees in a jar. Here in the 6 realms of hell beings, hungry, ghosts, animals, humans, demigods and gods, our tainted positive and negative actions cause us to circle, taking one rebirth after another. And this is why we we speak of cyclic existence. To take rebirth in the higher realms of gods and humans, we need to cultivate the 10 virtues. And to avoid suffering, we need to abandon the 10 non-virtues. So if you engage in the 10 non-virtues, then there's no way out of it. You will be reborn in samsara. You will continue to suffer in samsara. So it doesn't matter sort of what you think and say. I'm not going to take rebirth in the 3 lower realms. I don't want to take rebirth in the 3 lower realms. If you keep on engaging in the 10 non-virtues, then there's no way around it. You will 100% take rebirth in hell or the other, or as hungry ghost or animal. So there's a funny story about, anyway, there's one scholar and someone said so there was a scholar, a very kind of smooth-tongued scholar. Anyway, then he said to someone, if you said to another teacher or another scholar, if you spend your day up in the mountains looking for wild potatoes, then by the end of the day you can have a whole hamper full of wild potatoes, and then you'll have lots of food to eat. But you spend your whole day just teaching the Dharma, studying the Dharma, and what do you have to show for it by the end of the day? And this other scholar replied, "What are you talking about? My aim is not to accumulate wild potatoes. My aim is to gain liberation and enlightenment. That's why I'm, not going out to dig for wild potatoes. I'm practicing the Dharma instead." And anyway, Mishita told that story in a very nice way. That's the point is we act. Maybe the point is that we act according to our aims, right, to our goals. So if you're seeking liberation and enlightenment, then that's the case.
다 본부 다 저리 지지면인데 아주 매로 집 있는 직선에서 다 말씀이요. 다른 뭐 구쇼사에서 빌라서 장고서 야 저니 전에 다들 미저도 세워서 다른 이 샘디스 아주 매로 집 있었어. 어디서는 야랑쇼선 된다고. 다디인데 아주 감좀 걸어와라. 레마 무게를 다른한테 딕바 지당들 다른 걸어와 깨주게 되네. 자직전이 되대. 방안한 삼도 대대를 존중을 눈알
So the text says, and though we want to avoid suffering, we persistently indulge in its cause, negative actions, and we therefore experience their result, suffering in all its various forms. Even then, we seem incapable of fear and voluntarily accept suffering. So even though we've already taken rebirth in the lower realms of samsara so many times, we've suffered so much, still we seem to have no hesitation to gather the causes for further suffering. We continue engaging in the 10 non-virtues, which are the causes of that suffering, and voluntarily we accept more suffering. As the way of the Bodhisattva puts it, for beings long to free themselves from misery, but misery itself they follow and pursue. They long for joy, but in their ignorance destroy it as they would destroy their foe. Just like the example of a moth being attracted by the light of a lamp and burned by the desire for beautiful forms and so on. So a moth feels the heat of the lamp, but still they dive into it and then they're killed. So in the same way, humans are attracted to beautiful forms or beautiful sounds, like a deer drawn to their death by the sweet sound of the lute, beautiful taste, like a bee trying to suck the honey from a flower and then dying when they get stuck, or the flower closes on them. There are some carnivorous flowers, right, which actually eat insects and even quite large animals. Maybe these plants aren't sentient beings, but this is how they function. They need like nourishment, and they take that from bugs that enter their flowers. Likewise, fish allude to their death by the taste of the bait on the tip of the angler's hook. And elephants die when their desire for coolness induces them to plunge into a lake. So, in this way, because of our attachment to the 5 objects of desire, we do all sorts of things. It's for this reason, out of attachment, longing for better food, delicious food, and so on, that people pursue a life in the West, and they go to really extreme means to go overseas. If you go to America, it seems it's not so bad, but a lot of Nepalese go to the Middle East, and a lot of them end up dying because they have such terrible living conditions there. You hear about more than 10 dead bodies, the bodies of migrant workers, are returned to Nepal every day via plane.
조건 가시 야매시고 있어요. 마우스 가시단 거를 창다 dob지 가져서 배사 가져야 그러면 남은 지금 게임에는 개비지는 두개는 거를 강제를 접접접접접접서 여기 걔는 그런 이야기를 내가 저기 장동 바가 이 낭마스기 저서 자루겨서 어디서 나와서 Language Silvi Racha, Doni, Solution, language Yakataba, the Chunan, Davana, Tim,
In Songs from the Treasuries, Songs of Realization by Saraha, we read, every single being is beguiled by the gestures of existence. Gesture, mudra, means a physical, verbal, or mental gesture. Beings are beguiled by the gestures of existence, deceived by them. So when it says gesture or mudra here, we're not talking about like the hand mudras we do in rituals. So here it means the karma of samsaras. Oh, says the archer, speaking of the ignorant. Regard them as being like fish, moths, elephants, bees, and deer. The archer is an epithet for Saraha, the Mahasiddha Saraha. So these examples of fish, moths, elephants, and so on are examples of how we are attached to the 5 objects of desire, the 5 sense pleasures, and we fall under the sway of that attachment. From the 5 objects, the afflictive emotions arise, and because of these we wander endlessly in psychic existence. There's not a single one of all these sentient beings with whom we have not been related in turn as father or mother, or related through enmity, friendship, or indifference. There's not a single sentient being that we have not been connected to in the past. Not a single one who hasn't been our mother, our father, who hasn't been our friend, likewise our enemy. So we've been related to all beings as father, mother, child, and so on. And when parents have children, then they're so concerned about their children. They give everything they have so that their children kind of flourish, so that they can be comfortable and so on. But then so many children that just take their money or what their parents have given them, they gamble it away or they misuse it, they waste it away, and they don't even say thank you. And Rishi quoted some lines of Sakya Pandita's perfect explanation that speak to the same point. So from one perspective, anyway, this is like a gesture of love that parents have for their children, but it also shows that one isn't able to make meaningful use of one's wealth, right? Like use one's wealth in offerings to the 3 jewels and to help the needy, but instead one is willing to give all of one's wealth for one's children, right, out of attachment to one's children, but then they misuse it and nothing comes of it. The children just leave their parents behind. They go off to the West or what have you, and every few months they give them a call and say, how are you, and say, all right, I'll send you some money. but they don't actually show them any affection, spend time with them, or look after them. And that's too often how it is. If one were to try to number the ancestral maternal line of a single being by rolling pillules in the size of juniper pips from the earth and counting them, saying this one is this being's mother, that one is her mother, one could go on counting until all the earth were used up. So Khyentse Daso Rinpoche explained that there are two types of juniper pips in terms of size. So one is a juniper pip, as the Tibetan has been translated here, but that same word could be understood to refer to actually something like a tiny ball of cotton wool, much, much smaller. So in any case, if you were to roll up little balls this size, using all the earth in the entire world, still there wouldn't be enough balls to count all the mothers that you've had in the past. But there is no end to counting the ancestral line of each being's mothers, as the Buddha explained in a sutra whose meaning is conveyed in the following verse by the protector Nagarjuna: to count one's mother's lineage with pills like juniper pips in size, the earth would not suffice. So this again is from Nagarjuna's letter to a friend. Thus, from time without beginning until now, there is no form of suffering that one has not experienced in cyclic existence. O monks, you should therefore be weary of the world of existence. Thinking of this, you should feel disenchantment, weariness for samsara, because in all the time you've been going round and round, the bodies you've left behind when you rebirth as an ant, if all added together, would make a pile far higher than the king of mountains, and so on. So you must feel weariness, disenchantment for samsara. The tears you've wept exceed all the water in the four oceans. The quantity of boiling molten copper blood, lymph, pus, and nasal mucus that you've drunk an infinite number of times when you were a hell being or a hungry spirit is greater than the four great rivers that flow into the oceans from the four continents. The heads, eyes, limbs, fingers, and toes that you had severed on account of your desires exceed in number all the molecules of earth, water, fire, and wind in universes numerous as the grains of sand in the river Ganges. So that you've severed on account of your desires for your spouse, for wealth, for those to whom you are attached. They exceed in number all the molecules of earth, water, fire, and wind in all the universes, numerous as the grains of sand in the river Ganges. So we dedicate the merit and we'll stop for a short break.